December 9th, 536 AD, the Byzantine army, under command of the famous general Belisarius, enters and reconquers Rome. The Gothic army that had been there before flees the city, allowing the Byzantines to enter unopposed when they come. This is in the time of the famous Emperor Justinian of the Byzantine Empire. One of Justinian's big projects, among other things, was to recapture Rome, along with a lot of the land that had been lost with the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Byzantine Empire is, of course, the continuation of the Eastern Roman Empire. Ultimately, long-term, the Byzantines did not hold the city of Rome. However, that was not entirely the fault of Belisarius. In fact, Belisarius is debatably on the top 10 list of most famous generals of all time. I know that he is overshadowed by Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, Hannibal Barca, etc., but he is still quite up there on the list. December 9th, 730 AD, the Battle of Marj Ardabil. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Now, when Western schools teach about the rise of Islam and the Islamic Golden Age, the rapid expansion of the Umayyad Caliphate, this part of world history sort of gets brushed over as just the Muslims conquered a whole bunch of stuff really fast, and all of a sudden, overnight, all of this land was under Islam. But conquering anything, no matter what it is, does not come without its challenges, including this one huge military defeat for the Umayyads. If you look at this map, you notice they conquered far east into Asia, far west, all across North Africa, even into Spain. But comparatively, they did not advance very far into the Caucasus region, that is the region between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. This battle happens to have been in that region, and the Khazar people, the semi-nomadic horse archers that opposed the expansion of Islam into that region, their horse archer tactics were famously good against structured, disciplined armies for millennia until guns came along. December 9th, 1531, Our Lady of Guadalupe is the name for a series of appearances of the Virgin Mary to one Mr. Juan Diego in Mexico City, and December 9th was the date of the first one. This has since become sort of a national symbol and a pilgrimage site in Mexico. December 9th, 1718, this is the date of death for Vincenzo Coronelli. He was an Italian cartographer, best known for making a pair of large globes for King Louis XIV of France, globes that mapped the known lands of the Earth, and reflected recent at the time discoveries from French explorers in North America. I mentioned these globes are large, they are 10 feet in diameter, and they weigh around 2 tons. He also made a number of other globes at various times and places. Many of them are still on display in major cities around Europe, including, of course, Paris and also Vienna. December 9th, 1775, the Battle of Great Bridge. This is part of the American Revolution. This is a few months past the battles of Lexington and Concord. The Revolution had been going on for the better part of a year at this point. However, far from Massachusetts, this one took place a little bit in the south in Virginia. It's a lesser-known battle, but the result of this one pretty much drove the British out of Virginia for the early part of the war. And largely this was because the British side was misinformed about the number of Patriot militia on the rebel side. They expected the number to be around 400, but in fact it was a little over 800. December 9th, 1835, this is the Texas Revolution. American settlers in Texas are fighting for independence from the Mexican government. And we're in the final days of a 2-month-long siege of a place called San Antonio de Bexar. This is the day when San Antonio, yes, the same modern-day city of San Antonio, is captured by the Texan army and taken from the Mexicans. December 9th, 1851, you know it, you love it, you've probably danced to that one song about it. The first ever YMCA on the American continent is opened up in the city of Montreal, Canada. They have everything for young men to enjoy. You can hang out with all the boys. December 9th, 1868, the very first traffic lights are installed. These were put outside the British government offices in Westminster, London, where better. And humanity did not yet have electric in 1868, so these lights were illuminated by red and green gas lamps. December 9th, 1872, this photograph is one PBS Pinchback. He briefly served as governor of Louisiana, and he is credited with being the very first African-American governor of an American state. Now, I say briefly served because he was not elected, he was appointed, because he happened to be second in command when the previous governor was impeached and removed. So he served in the role for a total of 35 days. Which, from a historical point of view, looking back at this, I kinda wish the first elected African-American was the one who got the honors for this one. December 9th, 1917, the man you see in this picture is Edmund Allenby. A veteran of the Second World War, he was an officer in the British Army, and in 1917 he was leading the Army's Egypt Expeditionary Force on the Sinai and Palestine campaign. At a time when most other combatants in World War I were focusing on mainland Europe, the British Army sent a military force under command of this guy to go after the Ottoman Empire's holdings in the Levant. And in particular, on December 9th of that year, he entered the city of Jerusalem. The British Empire taking this region would be a step towards the international Zionist plan of recreating the nation of Israel, resurrecting that ancient kingdom, and establishing the international Jews in their ancient homeland. December 9th, 1995, this is the date of death for Douglas Corrigan. He was a pilot who earned the nickname Wrong Way. He started out on a transcontinental flight across the U.S., started from Long Beach, California, then went to New York City. His flight path was then supposed to take him from New York back to California, but instead he flew out of Brooklyn and ended up in Ireland. This trip happened in 1938. December 9th, 1935, this is the date of death for Walter William Liggett. He was a journalist back when journalists had chutzpah and a sense of purpose. He did reporting for various newspapers in the New York City as well as the Minneapolis-St. Paul areas, and much of his investigative work involved taking down organized crime rings. Being that as it was, it is little surprise that his cause of death was murder at the age of 49, drive-by shooting with a Thompson submachine gun, the time he was taking groceries home to his apartment in Minneapolis. December 9th, 1935, there are protests in Tiananmen Square. No, not that famous protest. This one happened a few decades before that. This is in the midst of the Chinese Civil War, so multiple domestic factions are fighting for control over the Chinese government and the Chinese homeland. And in the midst of this, things are heating up leading up to World War II, and the Japanese have started showing aggression towards their neighbor. So what this protest was about is students were gathered in the square to ask the Chinese government to do something about that Japanese aggression. This protest was then dispersed by government troops. December 9th, 1937, 2 years to the day after that protest in Beijing. This is part of the Sino-Japanese War. Most people just consider this an extension of World War II. These are the final days of a month-long siege on the Chinese city of Nanking by the Japanese army. Japan is securing their victory in this city, beginning what will be known as the Rape of Nanking. I'll spare you the details, but just know that the name is not an exaggeration at all. And the Chinese people will, remember that. There are quite a lot of hard feelings about it to this day. December 9th, 1946, the Constituent Assembly of India meets for the first time. It is here that they begin drafting the constitution that would become the constitution of the nation of India. At the time, India was still occupied by the British government. However, they were struggling to free themselves from British rule and become independent. Writing a constitution is, of course, part of that process. And the British would in fact be thrown out of India in August of the following year. The United States of America v. Karl Brandt et al., otherwise known as the Doctors' Trial. This is the first of several subsequent trials against various people who were within the Nazi government administration during World War II. This one is called the Doctors' Trial because it focused on medical professionals who grotesque human experimentation up to and including state-sponsored homicide under the guise of euthanasia. Also accused of performing involuntary medical experiments on prisoners of concentration camps, etc., etc. These trials are where the world comes face to face with the question, is it illegal to lose a war? On their face, the trials prosecuted crimes against humanity, and on their face, the trials were conducted in a fair and just way. And maybe even some of the people who helped conduct these trials believed that. However, there was a distinct lack of impartiality, to say the least. And Soviet interrogators were allowed to inject their own Machiavellian methods into the pre-trial process. December 9th, 1948, this is the day that the powers that be signed the Genocide Convention, long name being the Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. This was the first human rights treaty unanimously adopted by the UN. And you know, how great is it that we actually stopped genocide in the year 1948? That's right, world peace, and all it took was the stroke of a pen. Tongue-in-cheek mode, of course. How many genocides can most of my viewers name off the top of their heads? Probably more than one since the signing of this document. And this is the problem with Leviathan-like supranational institutions like the UN. The institutions will claim to have all the answers literally in the entire world. Some number of people will believe it, and yet human nature will still be the same, and you cannot legislate for everything. So at best, you get a useless bureaucratic mess, and at worst, you get a top-down tyrannical beast that nobody can reform. December 9th, 1953, the General Electric Company, they are best known for making appliances and a whole lot more, On this date, they announced that all communist employees will be discharged from the company. This was part of the Red Scare in that first and second decade of the Cold War. Red-blooded Americans understood very well the reasons to distrust communist ideology, and we saw stuff like this, mass firings of employees who might conceivably pose a risk of passing on electrical engineering information to the Soviet Union. December 9th, 1960, this is the first airing of a show called Coronation Street in the UK, and this one holds the title for longest continuously running soap opera ever. From 1960 to the present day, 2026, it is still going on, with more than 11,700 episodes. And of course, they've had to replace cast members over the years. Kind of surprised the longest running one is one that I've never heard of, but then again, I'm not British. Also kind of surprised that the longest running soap opera is not either Spanish or Korean. But hey ho, I guess everyone loves soap operas. December 9th, 1973, the Sunningdale Agreement. This was an agreement between the Irish and the British governments that attempted to set up a sort of power-sharing governing structure in Northern Ireland. However, as you may have gathered, no matter who does what with regards to North Ireland and the unification of Ireland, someone involved will not like that, especially in the 20th century. So this agreement was very short-lived. The end of it was due to general protests, violence, and striking. This ended up collapsing in less than a year. December 9th, 1979, it is declared that the smallpox virus is driven to extinction. The last known case of smallpox had been a few years earlier, and this would be the first known human disease that has ever been driven to extinction. Immunizations of various kinds largely get the credit for this. Inoculation for smallpox goes back several hundred years. My favorite story about that is during the American Revolution. American prisoners of war on board British prison ships, they would keep them on boats a little ways off the coast so it's harder for them to escape, but they were also kept in really poor conditions. There was not much light, food came as often as it could be spared, and they had rodents, general uncleanliness, and of course disease. But the people on those ships knew of a way that they could inoculate themselves and each other for smallpox, and thus prevent at least one way that a lot of people died. December 9th, 1987, the First Intifada begins. This is, of course, having to do with the Israel-Palestine conflict. Israel at the time had a military presence in Gaza and the West Bank. Palestinians did not like this. So there was a long series of protests, strikes, terrorist attacks. This is just a really tense location in the world for geopolitical land disputes, and it has been for a long time. December 9th, 1992, United States military lands in Somalia for Operation Restore Hope. Now, America was actually doing this as part of a UN peacekeeping mission. Somalia at the time was going through a famine, their government had recently collapsed, and they were in the middle of a civil war. But this ended up being messier than expected, and part of the legacy of this operation includes the movie Black Hawk Down. December 9th, 2006. The Space Shuttle Discovery is launched once again. The mission number is STS-116. This time it is carrying the P5 truss segment, which is soon to be added on to the International Space Station. That segment is mostly an apparatus for mounting other pieces of equipment. December 9th, 2009, this is the date of death for Gene Barry. This might have been before a lot of our times, but he was a pretty famous American singer and actor. He starred in a 1953 War of the Worlds film, and also did a cameo in Spielberg's 2005 remake. December 9th, 2013, this is the date of death for Eleanor Parker, American actress. Most people today would know her from the 1965 film Sound of Music. She played the Baroness in that movie. December 9th, 2017, the Marriage Amendment Bill comes into effect in Australia, making them the 26th nation to legalize gay marriage.